Nobody at Fort Garland VA Medical Center wanted to fight for the brain-damaged Army Ranger in room 18. The psychiatrist called him deteriorating. The neurologist called him a liability. The charge nurse called him combative, though the only weapon he had left was his eyes, and even those had started to drift. Welcome to Quiet Badge's Stories. I'm glad you found this channel. If this one moves you, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below letting me know where in the world you're listening from. These stories travel farther than I ever expected, and I love seeing every corner of the map light up now. Let's get into it. Sergeant First Class Damon Kress had been at the VA for 4 months before anyone thought to question the diagnosis. He was 43 years old, a former Ranger with 3 combat deployments, and a record full of commendations that nobody on the staff had clearance to read. The IED that ended his career went off on a dirt road outside Deir ez-Zor at 0614 on a Tuesday. The blast was small by Syrian standards, the angle was not. The pressure wave caught him through the left side of the vehicle, knocked him unconscious for 11 minutes, and by the time his team got him stabilized and evacuated, the damage was already hiding inside him like a slow fuse. For 8 months after that, he functioned, slow, struggling, but functional enough that nobody flagged it until the day he walked out of a grocery store in Colorado Springs without his wallet, his keys, or any memory of why he had gone in. His wife Celia Kress drove him to the VA that afternoon and did not take him home after. By the time Dr. Curtis Harmon assumed his case, Damon had been classified under a protocol that put a ceiling on his care. Persistent cognitive impairment secondary to traumatic brain injury, severe. In the conference room, Harmon said the words precisely, calmly, with the practiced composure of a man who had learned that certainty commanded more respect than accuracy. Damon was present for that meeting. He sat at the table in a hospital gown, hands flat on his thighs, eyes forward. He did not speak because the words had started to disappear between his thoughts and his tongue, but his hands tightened when Harmon reached the phrase that mattered most. No functional recovery pathway. Laurel Vance was not in the room for that meeting. She was in the hallway, pushing a medication cart with one wheel that caught every third tile, watching through the small rectangular window in the door as Harmon handed Celia a pamphlet about long-term memory care placement. Laurel was 37, quiet, lean, with dark brown hair she kept tied back and gray eyes that a habit of landing on details nobody else was tracking. She wore bright blue scrubs that were a size too big because the VA ordered in bulk and did not ask. Her badge said RN, her face said nothing. But she had been watching Damon Kress for 3 weeks. Not obviously, she was too well trained for obvious. She watched the way a spotter watched, patient, still, reading angles. She had noted the difference between Damon's eyes during the day, when he seemed lost and flat, and Damon's eyes at 0300, when she made her quiet round and found him staring at the ceiling, with a focus that did not look like confusion. She had noted that his vitals spiked not randomly but specifically, always when a particular staff member repositioned him too quickly, always when the lights in his room were left on past midnight. She had written it in her notes, nobody had read them. In rounds the next morning, Dr. Harmon stood at the foot of Damon's bed and addressed the residents as though the man in it were a case study mounted on a wall. Continued decline consistent with projection, Harmon said. Recommend transitioning to Phase 2 observation protocol. A resident named Kenji shifted his weight. The night nurse noted he responded to verbal cues around 0300. Harmon's gaze moved to Kenji the way a searchlight moves, not warmly. Nurses note many things. Laurel kept her hands around the chart. She had heard a version of that sentence before. Different voice, different building, same architecture of dismissal. Harmon looked at Damon. Sergeant, we're going to make you comfortable. That's what we can offer you now. Damon's jaw moved, his lips pressed together. No words came out. His right hand opened and closed, once slowly, like a man reaching for something just out of reach. Harmon moved on, Laurel stayed. When the room cleared, she stood beside Damon's bed and checked his IV line. She did not perform concern the way some nurses performed it. Slow voice, tilted head, exaggerated eye contact. She spoke directly, at normal volume, to a man she was treating as still present. I'm going to check your pressure cuff. Blink if you can hear me. 1 blink. Does your head hurt worse in the morning or at night? He blinked twice. She had not told him what 2 meant. He had assigned it himself. Night, she wrote. 2 days later, he did something she was not ready for. It was 0248. The ward was down to a skeleton crew. Laurel was charting at the nurse's station when she heard it. A sound from room 18 that was not the monitor, not the hum of equipment, not the ordinary ambient breath of a sleeping man. She pushed back from the desk and moved to the doorway. Damon was awake, his head was turned toward the window, his lips were moving. She stepped closer. The sound was low, fragmented, not words at first. She stood still and listened the way she had once listened for voices beneath rubble, beneath fire. beneath the rotor wash of a helicopter holding position 60 feet overhead in a storm. Then she caught it. Grid coordinates. She recognized the format before she recognized the numbers. She recognized the numbers 3 seconds later, and her body understood before her mind did. That particular stillness that arrives when the path steps out of the dark and puts a hand on your shoulder. Kunar Province, eastern Afghanistan, a valley called Shigal, October 7 years ago. She had been dropped into that valley by hoist at 0340 in the middle of a firefight that was not supposed to be happening. A Ranger QRF team had been pinned between two ridgelines for 16 hours. The radio operator was down. The team leader had a sucking chest wound and was breathing through a hole the size of a quarter. The weather was wrong, the landing zone was wrong, everything was wrong. The only voice that cut through the static and guided her to the right position had been calm, flat, and absolutely certain. The call sign on that voice had been Ironside. Laurel stood in the doorway of room 18 and waited. Damon's lips moved again. Ridgeline. She went cold from the collarbone down. Ridgeline was her call sign, the one she had buried when she left the Air Force, the one tied to a classified extraction file that no one in this hospital had any reason to know existed. She crossed the room in 4 steps and leaned close to him. Ironside, she said, barely a breath, just enough sound to carry. Damon's eyes found hers. For the first time in 4 months, they were not drifting. They were exact. They held the particular relief of a man who has been signaling in the dark for a very long time and has finally gotten a signal back. His throat worked, his eyes filled. Laurel straightened. She checked the monitor. His heart rate had climbed from 61 to 88. His blood pressure, which had been sagging for 3 days, had lifted by 12 points. She wrote it down. She brought those notes to Dr. Harmon at 0730. He reviewed them over his coffee with the expression of a man reading a parking ticket he planned to contest. He was agitated, Harmon said. That explains the vitals. He recited classified military grid coordinates, Laurel said. That doesn't explain anything routine. Harmon set the page down. You're reading intent into the vocalizations of a patient with severe cognitive impairment. He spoke a call sign attached to a classified Air Force extraction file. The room went still. A medical student stopped typing. Harmon's voice did not raise. That was how she knew she had landed somewhere real. Loud men bluster. Controlled men calculate. How would you know what's in a classified file, Nurse Vance? Laurel held his gaze. I need him to have new imaging. There's a pressure pattern in his chart that's been ignored for 11 days. His imaging has been reviewed. Not with the right question. Harmon capped his pen. You've been on this unit for 8 months. In that time, you've filed 2 incident reports, questioned a medication plan, and now you're challenging a peer-reviewed diagnosis. He let that land. Some nurses confuse proximity to patients with expertise. Laurel said nothing. She had survived enough men like Harmon to know when to stop feeding the argument and start documenting instead. She documented everything. The break came 4 days later. Laurel was repositioning Damon's head support when she noticed it. His right pupil, slightly sluggish on the lateral check. Not absent, sluggish. She measured it twice. She pulled his chart. Cross-referenced it with his headache pattern, his nighttime agitation, the slow deterioration of his tracking response over the previous 72 hours. Elevated intracranial pressure, she wrote. Possible epidural hematoma, chronic and expanding. Recommend urgent CT with contrast. She brought it to Harmon. He dismissed it in 40 seconds. She brought it to the charge nurse, Tamsin. Tamsin read the notes carefully, looked at the ceiling, looked back at Laurel. If you're wrong about this, he will make your life on this unit very small. If I'm right and we wait, Damon doesn't have a life. Tamsin was quiet for a moment. I'll page neurology for a second opinion. Harmon intercepted the page. He came to the nurse's station at 11:15 with 2 administrators and a security officer, and informed Laurel that she was suspended from Damon Kress's care, pending a review of her documentation practices and her professional conduct. Laurel looked past him through the window of room 18. Damon had his eyes on her. They had not drifted. He trusts me, she said. He requires clinical oversight, not a personal relationship. He communicates with me. He vocalizes. There is a difference. The monitor in room 18 alarmed. Heart rate 44, blood pressure 79/46, then 74. Laurel moved. Harmon stepped into her path. You are suspended from this case. His pressure is dropping. It is a documented vagal pattern. His left pupil was sluggish this morning and you dismissed it. Move. She did not wait for permission. She went to the room, adjusted Damon's head position, lowered the bed angle, and called down the hallway in a voice that did not ask for anything. It simply told. Petra, get rapid response now. Kenji, page neurosurgery and say possible expanding intracranial hematoma with autonomic compromise. Tell them it has been developing for 11 days and it is accelerating. Nobody moved for half a second. Now, Laurel said. They moved. What happened in the next 4 hours stripped the quiet off Laurel Vance the way a tide strips sand from a shore. Neurosurgery sent Dr. Amara Ose, who arrived skeptical and left the CT suite with a different face entirely. The hematoma was there, small, chronic, seated against the left temporal lobe in a location that explained every symptom Damon had shown for months and been medicated into silence for. It had been expanding slowly. It had been misread as imaging artifact on the original scan, and then not rescanned because Harmon's protocol had classified the case as closed. O.C. reviewed Laurel's notes, all 11 days of them. Her expression changed on page 3 and did not recover. This was flagged, O.C. said. 11 days ago, Laurel said. O.C. looked at Harmon. Harmon studied his tablet. We need to drain it now, O.C. said. Harmon said the risk profile on this patient is better than his dying on your watch, O.C. said. She did not wait for his answer. She looked at Laurel. You're with me. In the hallway, moving toward the OR, veterans watched from doorways, some in wheelchairs. An old man on a walker who had been a fixture at Fort Garland so long the day staff had stopped noticing him. As the gurney passed, he lifted 2 fingers, not a formal salute, something older and quieter than that. A recognition between people who understood what it cost to still be standing. Harmon followed them to the elevator. She is suspended, he said. She has no authority here. O.C. looked at him over her shoulder. She found what you missed. I'll take her authority. The elevator doors closed. Surgery lasted 2 hours and 19 minutes. O.Z. drained the hematoma cleanly. The pressure came off the temporal lobe like a hand finally releasing a grip it had held far too long. Laurel stood in the OR and did not interfere with the surgical team. She monitored the anesthesia board, called the early fluid numbers, caught the temperature drop before anyone else noted it. She kept her hands exactly where they belonged. She had spent 6 years doing this kind of work, entering impossible spaces and finding the thing nobody else had thought to look for. When it was over, Osei looked at her across the table. Ridgeline, Ozzy said quietly. Laurel's head came up. Damon told me, Osei said. Before the anesthesia took him fully, he said, tell Ridgeline she was right. I thought it was the sedation talking. She paused. I tried to find a file attached to that call sign in a Kunar province extraction. There wasn't one that I could access. That told me what I needed to know. Laurel was quiet. Air Force Rescue, Osei said. Former. What pulled you out of it? A silence that lasted a beat too long. I lost someone on an extraction. I left after that. Joel Garrity, Osei said. The room narrowed around that name. Damon told me that too, Osei said. He was clear about it, clearer than anyone expected him to be. Harmon was not at the nurse's station when Laurel came out of the OR corridor. He was in the administrator's office behind a closed door. The kind of meeting that ends with a significantly smaller career. The hallway outside the ICU had filled. Veterans from 3 different wards. Standing room only for a group of people who had spent years being told to wait. Celia Kress was there. Laurel knew her because she had Damon's particular stillness, and she was gripping a paper cup of cold coffee, like it was the only solid thing left in the building. Laurel went to her. He's out, it went clean. He has a real chance now. Celia's face broke in the quiet way that faces break when they've been held together by sheer will for 4 months straight. He kept saying a name, she said. For weeks. I thought it was the damage. I thought I saw something the injury made up. She stopped. He said Ridgeline, over and over. I didn't know what it meant. It meant he remembered who could hear him, Laurel said. Damon woke at 2200. He came back slowly, testing each word before he used it, the way a man tests ice at the edge of a pond. His eyes found Laurel first, then Celia, then the room, then Laurel again. His voice was rough and thin, but it was there. I knew you were there, he said. I kept trying to tell them. I know, Laurel said. I heard you. They kept saying it was the TBI. He swallowed. I could hear every single word they said about me. I just couldn't get mine out fast enough. Laurel thought about that for a moment. About being completely present inside a body the world had decided was empty. About the particular violence of being seen clearly only by the people who benefited from your silence. Not anymore, she said. The investigation into Harmon's unit began the following morning, driven by OC's documented findings, Laurel's 11 days of records, and a pharmacy audit that surfaced what nobody had named out loud yet. Damon Kress had been enrolled in a clinical trial for a cognitive suppression compound. Without his consent, without Celia's knowledge, without ethics board approval. The trial was funded by a private neuropharmaceutical firm. The protocol required participants to be classified as severe permanent impairment. Patients showing documented recovery potential were ineligible. Damon had been kept ineligible by being kept invisible. 3 weeks after surgery, a colonel from the Army Medical Liaison Office arrived at Fort Garland with a sealed envelope. He found Laurel at the nurse's station near the end of her shift. He placed the envelope on the counter without ceremony. "From Sergeant Garrity's commanding officer," he said, left with standing instructions to deliver it if Ridgeline was ever located. Laurel opened it after the colonel left. 1 page. Joel Garrity's handwriting. She recognized it by the slight leftward lean of his capital letters, the same way he had written coordinates on acetate overlays in the back of a Pavehawk 7 years ago. "Ridgeline, stop counting my extraction as your debt. I was breathing when you handed me off. That was your job and you did it. What came after is mine to own, not yours to carry. Do the work. Keep doing the work. That's the only thing I ever needed from you. Garrity." She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the pocket of her scrubs, against her sternum, where it stayed through the rest of her shift and the shift after that. Harmon lost his license 6 months later. The pharmaceutical company lost 4 federal research contracts and 1 class action settlement that was still ongoing when this story was written. The VA issued a region-wide directive requiring independent neurological reassessment for any veteran classified as severe permanent cognitive impairment within the preceding 24 months. Fort Garland called the protocol the Kress Standard. The nurses called it something shorter. They called it HERD. Damon Kress walked out of the rehabilitation wing on a cold Tuesday in January, 71 days after surgery, with Celia on his left side and a cane he was already using less than the physical therapist required. He stopped at the nurse's station where Laurel was finishing a chart. He set something on the counter, a small unit patch, worn soft at the edges, the fabric gone thin from years in a pocket. 75th Ranger Regiment. "Joel would have wanted you to have it," he said. "He always said the best part of a rescue wasn't the pilot or the plan. It was whoever showed up when everything else had already failed." Laurel looked at the patch. She thought about Joel's letter. She thought about 11 days of notes that nobody read until one person did. "Ironside," she said. He almost smiled. It was the first time she had seen him anywhere close to one. "Ridgeline," he said. She pinned the patch inside her locker beside the folded letter, next to a photograph she had kept for 7 years of a valley in eastern Afghanistan that had looked, from the hoist line at 0340, like the very edge of the known world. Damon Kress never called himself healed. Laurel Vance never called herself a hero. But every morning in a ward that had once mistaken silence for absence, they left behind a different word for what it meant to still be in the room. Not gone, present. That's where we'll leave it today. Thank you for spending time here on Quiet Badge's Stories. If this one stayed with you, please leave a like. It helps more people find these stories than you might think. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. And drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're listening from. I read every single one. Until next time.